A pleasure to me all at last. Now we are at it with the fifth and final film in the Air Bud series. So, why don't we go on ahead and start our discussions with Air Bud Spikes Back. Released in 2003, this was the last piece that Air Bud would ever come around to. The fifth film in the series, a fifth sport for Air Bud himself to play. And this is, in fact, the part where Kevin Zegers is not a part of the franchise anymore. Yeah, so this is the only film that we have now where Zegers is basically having his character Josh Fram carry on over to his time in college, whereas his sister Andrea is mostly there to claim the main protagonist spot, alongside Air Bud himself, of course. And believe it or not, while Disney was mostly responsible for the film entirely, production was mainly handled by the likes of Dimension Films and Keystone. That's right. They tried it again, and it thankfully didn't end up a flop. Mostly because this was direct-to-video releases. Basically, when they stopped doing theatrical releases after the not-so-good success that was Air Bud Golden Receiver, with the last three films in the series, World Pup, Seventh Inning Fetch, and Spikes Back, well, it was quite clear that direct-to-video releases were becoming the mainstays for Air Bud films, knowing that they didn't want to suffer from any kind of box office negativity or negative reception by critics. So, at least to this degree, they were able to do such a good job with it, and Keystone was able to thankfully follow up Seventh Inning Fetch with something that probably does follow closely behind. But in any case though, as the name of the movie itself implies, especially when in regards to the subtitle, this gives us the story of how Andrea and Air Bud are in fact volleyball players now. And well, after the big time conspiracy that went down where a raccoon was dog napping and two researchers, quote unquote, were basically being funny and kind of relentless as antagonist characters, what we have here is in fact a pair of crooks known as Doug and Gordon. And these two guys are in fact, believe it or not, hoping to do some of the same stuff that we have seen before. We've had conspiracies relating to abusive dog ownership, circus performing, and simple kidnapping. But in this instance, we have some not so great moments regarding these antagonistic characters. They seem a bit generic in contrast to the last guys that we've had to deal with in Seventh Inning Fetch. And I feel like that probably does downplay the movie's overall scoring in comparison to Seventh Inning Fetch as a main point. But other points, of course, will have to include an accompanying character whom is in fact a talking parrot. Yeah. If you thought that Air Bud himself was already impressive as an animal character, well, look no further than this crazy parrot. I mean, then again, we have had to deal with a raccoon in the last film. So, it was at this exact point in which that Disney started to basically utilize the Air Bud series with accompanying animal characters. Which would technically explain why, with every Air Buddies film that has come out since 2006, they would actually have all five of the Air Buddies together and have accompanying animals alongside them. A wolf, a monkey, and a ferret, just to name a few. But it was at this point in the Air Bud films in which that it started to become a common thing going on in the plot, where you have crooks trying to steal the dogs and try to use them for their own personal goals, while accompanying animals basically on the good or bad side of things, or even neutral, as it has happened before, especially with the newer films. But in this whole instance, Spikes Back was at least a good way to set the tone and overall formatting for all future installments in the Air Bud series, including all of the Air Buddies films. Anyways though, the main plot line that we have here to work with is that Buddy himself finds out that he can play volleyball, and it starts to become a pro at it. Much like what we've seen before, it's the same old stuff, yada yada yada. You have Andrea trying to go to California to play some volley over out there on the beach. And when Air Bud comes along with her, they do in fact score some pretty bad to the bone matchups. And well, there basically was a point where essentially, well, Andrea would actually end up having to move to California. And there is a certain person by the name of Tammy whom she intends to visit. And the real unfortunate thing about all this is that while we do get mentionings of Josh Fram in the plot, he's never physically shown. Ergo, he never appears in the movie entirely. But for the main purpose of all this, he actually goes back to playing NFL rather than coming around to Fernfield for summer vacation or whatnot. Which I do find kind of silly. I mean, if we were going to have Josh Fram at least one last time for his own appearance and all that, wouldn't Kevin Zegers at least be okay with all this? Then again, there's not much that I have looked into regarding Kevin Zegers' appearances elsewhere. But above all that, this movie does in fact give us the exact same kind of crap that we've had to deal with. We have Andrea taking Buddy around, going places, having him play certain sports, and the crooks come in. A talking parrot comes by and helps rather than assist with the kidnappers. Much like with Rocky Raccoon in the last film. And eventually, we do get, believe it or not, a big ending. This is in fact the point where the criminals end up right in front of Sheriff Bob, played by good old Patrick Crenshaw. And even more so, there is his bloodhound assistant known by the name of Sniffer. So when you think about it, this is, like I've said, a way that they were able to set up the Air Buddies from the ground up. A way to set up the new series, which would begin in 2006, a mere 6 months, 3 years afterwards. And so, with 3 years, this definitely gave us a lot of time to think about what they could possibly do. And thankfully, the Air Buddies films, they did manage to carry on in such a unique way over the years. But in all seriousness, with all the Air Bud films that have come around and then gone, 5 different films between 1997 and 2003, it sure has become a unique phenomenon that Disney was able to give us. A 5-part series that would eventually transition over to a reboot series in which that 5 offspring of the legendary Air Bud himself would come around to carry on his legacy, along with his newfound companion known as Molly. And as we know, in World Pup, we were able to see these puppies for the first time, but the story itself would carry on over to a new generation of Golden Retriever athletes. In terms of how I would have to say about the Air Buddies series, it's probably best that we save this for another time, because there's really no telling what we could possibly get at this point. Maybe there could be more films in this series that might be worth talking about. Maybe there could be another reboot, Air Buddies Juniors or something like that. Who really knows? In comparison to the 7th Inning Fetch, Spike's Back is not exactly the impressive feature that I would have hoped for, but at least in a follow-up sort of aspect, it does all right by its own way. And at least Keystone has been able to improve pretty well. Mainly because Disney's guidance had allowed them to do even better. And with Dimensions films also handling the work, I could see why it actually went so well, to the point where Disney decided to carry it on even further and create a new series just for us to see. Now, I won't go to Air Buddies right away. I'll probably save that for another time. But if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Then, well, of course, my first scoring, obviously for Air Bud Strikes Back, not as good as the last film that we had, but it only maybe comes out to around a 7.0 out of 10.1. So, while it's not exactly as proficient in many ways, and at least does well, being that it was the last time we ever had the original Air Bud. And also, one of the last times that Sheriff Bob would come around, knowing that Patrick Crenshaw would die 2 years after, in 2005, before Air Buddies. And so, Even though he lived through the entirety of the production of Air Buddies, he unfortunately would not make it over to the rest of the films. So, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.
Whatever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.